Tomorrow is GCSE English Literature Paper 1. You are going to get a grade 9. And in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how, using some tips and strategies that a lot of students forget about or have never heard of, that you can be using today, the day before the exam, and tomorrow before the exam, in the morning, and during the exam itself, to make sure you are maximising the marks that you can possibly get and showing your examiners that you are worthy of top grades. Alright, we are going to go through a step-by-step plan for today, the day before the exam, to make sure that you have got everything under control and that this is going to be your best performance in an English exam ever. First of all, you want to be very, very familiar with what is being tested of you. You should have done enough past papers by now to know exactly what the format of the exam is going to be, exactly what each question is assessing. If you've not done that, or you're slightly feeling apprehensive and you just want to refresh, go back, have a look at some of the past papers, check you know how they're structured, and also give reference to the marking criteria, so that's AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4. Make sure you know what they all are and how they are relevant to answering the different questions. Now, this paper 1 is going to be assessing you on Shakespeare and 19th century novel. So what I would do the day before, just to make sure that all of your key ideas are fresh in your head, I would create what is called a 3-theme grid. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick 3 of the biggest themes relevant to that text. So if you're doing Macbeth, for example, that'll be things like ambition, the supernatural, kingship. And for each of those themes, you're going to pick 2 to 3 relevant quotations, explain those quotations, picking out number 1, the features, and number 2, authorial intent, and also a context point. So that is relating back to the period in which that Shakespearean play, so obviously Jacobean era, or the 19th century novel was written. I would also take 20 minutes to half an hour to look at some of the past paper questions and write mini essay plans under time pressure. So I would give myself 3 minutes to scribble out a plan relating to that essay question. If you've been through all the past papers, you know all the essay questions, you know what you'd write. Write yourself a couple of questions and then do that same process, because it's just 20 minutes or half an hour. You can fit it into your day-to-day, but that is going to be the best practice you can possibly get for making sure that you're able to link themes, link characters, think about all of the ideas, think of quotations, and just make sure that when you get in the exam tomorrow, you are going to be able to plan under pressure because you have just practiced it today. I would then also be thinking about your paragraph structure. So there are a lot of different paragraph structures that you can use, but I would get you to settle on one that you're going to choose and actually use in the exam tomorrow, so that you've got a rough blueprint, a guideline that you can follow in the exam. And the way that I would do that is I would make sure that, okay, if you're using the Peele paragraph structure, point, evidence, link, explanation, link, make sure you're always including to link. But I would also keep in the forefront of your mind, if your paragraph structure doesn't explicitly include context, or it doesn't explicitly include why the writer has phrased something a certain way, make sure that that is still in the forefront of your mind, just so that you're not neglecting, because if you don't include context, for example, in an English literature response, you cannot hit top band marks. So make sure you are incorporating everything. You could use an alternative paragraph structure, something like Victor, where you're looking at the viewpoint of the writer, you're bringing in your sort of interpretation of a quotation, you're thinking about context, then you're looking to other parts of the text and also the effect on the reader, Victor. So that can be quite a useful paragraph structure to use as well if you think that remembering Peele is going to mean that you neglect including certain aspects, such as doing things like including context and talking about authorial intent you wouldn't otherwise do. All right, now what are we going to do on the day of the exam? For a lot of people, this is going to be your first GCSE paper. So that can be quite scary if you've never done a formal exam before. I'm just going to spend 2 seconds talking about the absolute minimum, which is, be on time, make sure you're studying the cue, try not to fret too much, don't be bouncing negative energy with your friends that are just not going to help you. Just try and stay calm, look over a cheat sheet if it helps right before you walk into the exam. Make sure you have everything with you, bring about 5 different spare pens because you never know what's going to happen, and just try to ensure that you kind of do everything before the exam to make yourself slightly calmer. Now, once you're in the exam and you open your exam paper and you see the question, you are not going to touch your pen. You're not going to pick up your pen. You're just going to read the question multiple times, 2, 3, 4 times, read it over and over again to get that into your head. The worst thing that you can possibly do is ever so slightly misinterpret the question. If the question asked about, the subversion of gender norms in Macbeth, for example, and you ever so slightly misinterpret that and just focus your entire answer around how Lady Macbeth is ambitious, without really talking about the subversion of gender roles. You're not talking about Macbeth as well. You could even bring in Banquo or King Duncan for this, for example. Then you're not fully getting to the core of that question. You can never be put in those top bands simply because you're not attacking the core of that question. So make sure you reread it multiple times, you've got it in your head, and then you're going to bullet point plan just as you did yesterday, which is today. Some responses, you're going to bullet point what your paragraphs are. So for me, I would normally do an introduction, which would just state my thesis, run through very, very briefly exactly what my paragraphs are going to cover, and essentially state my opinion. And then I would have 3 paragraphs, and I would bullet point plan all of those paragraphs in the first 5 minutes of the exam. That would be really, really simple because I was using paragraph structure that was very, very similar to Victor. I basically bullet points, view, the quotation I want to talk about, is there any relevant context, can I think off the top of my head of any interesting things about how it might be interpreted differently by readers in the modern context versus in the context at which it was written, something like that. And then I would just go straight into writing. And something that I really want you to remember when it comes to writing in English Lit is that it is really quality over quantity, but you do need to hit a minimum quantity to be able to really push yourself into top band marks. So that is sort of, depending on how large your handwriting is, I have minuscule handwriting, which I did have to make bigger for the exams, and that is a separate point in and of itself. Please, 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 as much as it can be really, really tempting to let the quality of your handwriting go down so that you can finish a point, get towards the end of your essay, use time wisely, if they cannot read it, you will not be marked. They're not going to try and guess what it says. If it is illegible at first glance, that is it. You've capped your marks. They're not going to look at it. So please, please, please prioritise your handwriting. Make sure it is legible and make sure that an examiner is going to be able to look at it and read it and actually understand what you have to say. Because even if you think, I have messy handwriting, but my teacher can always read it, your teacher might be more familiar with your handwriting than an external examiner would be. So just be very careful on that front. But that being said, do try and hit 2-3 pages if you can. That is going to make sure that you've filled it with enough stuff so that there's enough high quality stuff in there as well, because obviously simply stating points, stating quotations, people can do that, everyone can do that. That is consistent across pretty much all of the bands. You need to be adding in that extra stuff, which is what is going to differentiate you, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you've written enough. Okay, so some extra tips for in the exam that a lot of students forget. First of all, never quote dump. Don't just put in 3-4 quotations and leave it at that. Embed them naturally. So even if embedding them naturally is in this certain act, this scene, Shakespeare, presents XXX as whatever by stating, and then you're putting your quotation. It doesn't have to be embedded in the flow of the sentence, if that makes sense, but it's got to not just be quotation. And then Banquo said quotation. And then this meant that it was supernatural because that is not helpful because you are not elaborating, you're not explaining those quotations, and the explanations, the analysis, that is where the marks come from. So never quote dump, only use a quotation if you're actually going to explore it. It can be really easy if you underline the key ideas in the question itself. Make sure you're coming back to that at the end of every paragraph and at the start of every paragraph. So as you're stating your viewpoint, your perspective, whatever that paragraph is going to talk about, make sure it is linked to exactly what is being asked of you in the question. At the same time, at the end, as you sort of reiterate your point or sort of make your point and change it ever so slightly given the analysis that you've just made, link it back to the focus of the question. And throughout, you're obviously going to be using a lot of phrases that are like, this shows. Try and mix them up. I know it can be hard to think under pressure, but you've got a lot to choose from. This implies, this connotes, this demonstrates, this illustrates, this highlights. There are so many things that you can go for. Please, please, please just don't use this shows every single time. Those are some of my biggest tips for how you are going to get a grade 9 in your English Literature GCSE Paper 1 tomorrow. Good luck. And once you've done it, let me know in the comments how it went and if you want me to focus on anything in specific for English Literature Paper 2.